My line of work as a private investigator had rarely brought me anything glamorous or exciting. Most of my cases involved trailing cheating spouses, locating runaway pets, and the occasional low-level fraud. I worked out of a small, dimly lit office that reeked faintly of stale coffee, with peeling wallpaper and a blinking neon sign on the front window that barely caught anyone's attention. I'd long accepted that high-stakes cases were reserved for big-shot detectives, not people like me. That all changed the day he walked in. It was late on a Monday afternoon when I heard the bell above my office door ring. I looked up, expecting the usual client, a frustrated spouse or a disgruntled tenant, but the man who walked in was anything but ordinary. He was impeccably dressed, his suit tailored and spotless, with dark, piercing eyes that seemed to assess every inch of the room in one glance. His gaze landed on me, and for a moment, I felt pinned in place, like he'd sized me up in an instant and decided if I was worth his time. "I assume you're Mr. Holloway." His voice was smooth, deep, with an edge of authority that made me sit up a little straighter. "Yeah, that's me," I replied, trying to match his calm. "How can I help you?" He extended a hand, his grip firm and businesslike. "Mr. Reeves, I need your assistance with a delicate matter." As he took a seat, I couldn't help but notice the faint, precise creases on his suit. He opened a black leather briefcase, pulling out an envelope, which he slid across my cluttered desk. I could feel the weight of it before I even touched it. I resisted the urge to tear it open on the spot. "This is your fee," he said smoothly, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "I need you to find a man named Leon Finch. I'll pay you well for your discretion and efficiency." I picked up the envelope, carefully tucking it into my jacket. "Consider me interested, but I'll need more to go on. A photo? Last known address?" Mr. Reeves's expression remained unreadable. "There's no photo, and the information on him is limited. You'll find what I have inside the envelope. I trust you're resourceful enough to figure out the rest." I hesitated, an odd feeling tightening in my chest. I was no stranger to confidentiality. My clients were often private people. But Mr. Reeves felt different. He didn't seem concerned or nervous, like most people asking for an investigation. His calm was unnerving, as if he already knew everything that would happen next. "Can you tell me why you're looking for Leon?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. "Might help me to know what I'm walking into." Reeves's eyes darkened, his polite demeanor flickering for a split second. "Just find him. That's all you need to know. Approach him with caution. He may be difficult to deal with." With that, he stood, buttoning his jacket with precise movements. He gave me one final look, as if he was etching me into his memory. "I'll be in touch. Don't make me wait too long, Mr. Holloway." The door clicked shut behind him, and I released the breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The air felt heavy, charged with something unexplainable. For a minute, I debated whether to open the envelope at all. The case felt wrong somehow, like I was stepping into something I'd be better off avoiding. But I needed the money. I tore open the envelope and found an unsettlingly sparse set of details. No photos, no address, just a name and a list of aliases. One page, typed neatly, with a note at the bottom in bold: "Approach with caution." I flipped through the rest of the papers, trying to understand the man I was supposed to find. He was like a ghost, no digital footprint, no social media, no family ties listed. The only other details I had were a few names of associates and a vague mention of an organization called The Unseen. The name alone sent a shiver down my spine. The final item in the envelope was a hefty stack of cash, more than enough to cover my expenses and keep me focused on the job. But the more I stared at the information, the more uneasy I felt. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just nerves. Mr. Reeves might be eccentric, but there was no harm in a simple missing person case, right? I locked the office that night with a sense of dread I couldn't shake. As I walked home, I could swear I felt eyes on me, lurking in the shadows, watching my every step. I shook it off, forcing myself to focus on the payday ahead. Little did I know, this wasn't the kind of case you could just walk away from. I'd been on missing person cases before, but none of them prepared me for the strange leads that followed after Mr. Reeves walked into my life. Over the next few days, I combed through every source I could find, but tracking down Leon Finch was like trying to catch smoke. His paper trail was non-existent, no known family, no past addresses, and even people who'd supposedly known him seemed vague or contradictory. Finally, on the third night after hours of digging, I found something, a name that kept appearing in connection with Leon. Dr. Amelia Kane, a psychologist who specialized in high-risk clients. From what I could gather, Dr. Kane was known for taking on patients who'd been involved in illegal activities or had serious psychological issues. The connection was thin, but it was all I had. I needed to talk to her. The next day, I made my way to Dr. Kane's office in a quieter part of town. Her building was old, with faded paint and a faint musty smell that clung to the walls. I entered the lobby, greeted by a dimly lit corridor lined with closed doors. I approached the reception desk, half expecting to be turned away, but the receptionist barely looked up from her computer as she muttered, "She'll see you in a few minutes." I waited in the small reception area, feeling an odd sense of unease. Something about this place was off. When Dr. Kane finally called me in, she was standing by the door, a tall woman with sharp features and a scrutinizing gaze that made me feel like she was dissecting me with her eyes. "Mr. Holloway," she asked, offering a slight nod as I stepped into her office. I could tell she wasn't in the habit of inviting strangers into her personal space. Her office was pristine, almost sterile, with nothing personal decorating the walls or shelves, no family photos, no diplomas. Just a few books neatly arranged on a single shelf. I cleared my throat, trying to ease the tension. "Thank you for meeting with me, Dr. Kane. I'm looking for one of your former clients, a man named Leon Finch." Her face tensed slightly at the mention of his name, but she didn't respond immediately. Instead, she gestured for me to sit, and I took a seat across from her, noting the way her hands rested tensely on her lap. "Leon Finch," she repeated slowly, as if the name alone brought up memories she'd rather keep buried. "Mr. Holloway, may I ask why you're looking for him?" "I was hired to find him," I replied carefully. "A man named Mr. Reeves came to my office, said it was a delicate matter." Dr. Kane's expression darkened, and she let out a soft sigh. "You should be careful, Mr. Holloway. Leon isn't someone you just find in Mr. Reeves. If he's involved, that makes things even more complicated." My pulse quickened at her words, but I kept my face calm, leaning in slightly. "What do you mean? Is there something I should know?" Dr. Kane hesitated, her fingers tapping a slow, deliberate rhythm on the armrest of her chair. "Leon was deeply troubled. He came to me a year ago, convinced that he was being watched, that people were following him. At first I thought it was a severe case of paranoia, but the more he talked, the more I started to wonder. Wonder about what I prompted." She looked down, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "He called them the unseen. He claimed they were part of some organization. They could erase people's identities, track them anywhere. He believed they had connections everywhere and could reach anyone who tried to escape their network." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Did you ever see them? The unseen?" She shook her head. "No, but Leon was insistent. He said they had eyes and ears everywhere. At first I thought it was just a delusion, but he seemed so certain. And then one day he stopped coming to his sessions. He vanished without a word, and I haven't heard from him since." "Did he ever mention Mr. Reeves?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Her gaze flickered with something I couldn't quite place, fear, maybe, or a hint of regret. "No, but if Reeves hired you, then Leon was right to be afraid. I'd advise you to leave this case alone, Mr. Holloway. Whatever you're being paid, it's not worth the risk." Her warning stayed with me as I left her office, but I couldn't let it go. I had a reputation to uphold, not to mention a hefty payment from Reeves. I was already too deep into this to walk away. That night, as I sat in my office, piecing together everything Dr. Kane had told me, I began to feel a strange sense of unease. It was almost like the air around me had thickened, pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. The fluorescent lights above flickered, casting eerie shadows across the room. And then I noticed something that made my heart race. A black car parked across the street. It was subtle, barely noticeable in the dim light, but it had been there earlier, and it was there now. Its windows were tinted, and I couldn't see who was inside, but I could feel their gaze on me. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just a coincidence, but the longer I stared, the more I realized it was no accident. Someone was watching me. Determined to confront them, I grabbed my coat and headed down the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. As I stepped outside, I felt a cold gust of wind whip around me. I walked toward the car, my heart pounding, but just as I got close, it sped off, leaving only a cloud of dust and the faint smell of burning rubber. Back in my office, I found an envelope slipped under my door. It was unmarked, and my fingers trembled as I picked it up. Inside was a single piece of paper with a short message typed neatly across it: "Stop looking for Leon Finch." My mind raced, trying to make sense of the threat. But all I felt was a sense of dread, an impending danger that I couldn't ignore. I wasn't sure who had left the note, but the message was clear. I had a choice: keep searching for Leon Finch, or let this case go. But there was one thing I knew for certain: whoever the unseen were, they were watching me. The decision was supposed to be simple: walk away, pocket the money, and save myself the trouble. But I'd never been one to back down from a case, especially one that was shrouded in so much mystery. I wanted answers, and I wanted to know who was trying to control my moves. Little did I know that by ignoring the warning, I'd set myself on a path I could never come back from. The black car didn't show up the next day, but my sense of unease was stronger than ever. I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on me, unseen but persistent. Every shadow seemed to hide something, and every creak in my office felt like a threat. I kept thinking back to Dr. Kane's words: they could erase people's identities, track them anywhere. It all sounded impossible, paranoid, yet I couldn't deny what I was feeling. Whoever these people were, they were good. I spent the next few days going through every piece of information on Leon Finch that I had left, but as I delved deeper, it felt like the leads I'd followed had all somehow become dead ends. Any traces I'd found before, addresses, acquaintances, even small hints about his past, had disappeared or led nowhere. It was as if Leon Finch had never existed at all. Desperation began to settle in. I felt like I was slipping, spiraling into an obsession. I didn't want to admit it, but I was terrified. My instincts screamed at me to drop the case, to accept that Leon Finch was lost and leave this all behind. But the puzzle had me hooked. I needed answers. Late one night, I was in my office, half dazed and staring at a tangle of papers spread across my desk, when I heard a faint knock on the door. It was almost midnight, and I didn't get visitors at this hour. My hand instinctively went to the drawer where I kept a small handgun, but before I could reach it, the door creaked open. A man stepped in, drenched from the rain outside, his face shadowed by the dim light in the room. He was tall, thin, with a haggard, haunted look in his eyes, and I recognized him instantly. It was Leon Finch. He shut the door behind him, glancing around nervously, as if expecting someone to burst in any second. When he spoke, his voice was low, barely above a whisper. "You shouldn't have come after me. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." I was too stunned to reply immediately, but I managed to collect myself. "Leon Finch?" I asked, just to confirm. He nodded, running a shaky hand through his wet hair. "You have to stop looking. They know you're involved now, and they don't let anyone go once they're in the web." "Who are they?" "Leon," I pressed. "The unseen." Leon's face twisted with something between fear and regret. He took a step closer, his eyes hollow and desperate. "They're more than just an organization. They control information, they delete people from records, and they have reach in every system. Once you're on their radar, you're already marked." I swallowed, my pulse quickening. "Why did they come after you?" He looked away, as if searching for an answer he couldn't find. "I worked for them, indirectly. I was a consultant for some shell companies I thought were legal fronts. But they weren't. I found out too much, and once I tried to walk away, they started erasing me. First it was my accounts, then my contacts. Until no one remembered who I was. I barely got out." His words sent a chill down my spine. I wanted to back away, but I couldn't stop now. "And Mr. Reeves? Who is he?" Leon's face darkened. "Reeves is just a puppet, a front for them. He's used to lure people in like you, to tie up loose ends. You were never supposed to find me. Your job was to get close enough to be neutralized." I felt a sickening realization settle in. This whole thing had been a setup. From the moment Reeves walked into my office, I'd been dragged into something I didn't understand, something dangerous. "So what now?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay steady. Leon took a deep breath, glancing around as if we were being watched even now. "There's only one way to survive. You disappear. Change everything about your life. No phone, no bank accounts, no traceable habits. But even that might not be enough. They have eyes everywhere." The weight of his words hit me hard. I'd built my life here, my career, and now I was being told to throw it all away just to stay alive. But as I looked into Leon's terrified eyes, I knew he was right. Suddenly, Leon's face shifted, his expression filled with terror as he looked over my shoulder. I whipped around just in time to see a figure in the doorway dressed in a dark, nondescript suit, standing perfectly still, watching us. His face was emotionless, almost blank, and his eyes held no life. I barely had time to react before the figure raised something small and black, a device, not a gun, but something unfamiliar. A blinding flash filled the room, and everything went dark. I don't know how much time passed before I came to. When I opened my eyes, I was slumped in my chair, alone in my office, with a pounding headache. Leon was gone. My notes, my files on him, the mysterious envelope, everything was gone. The room looked like it had been untouched, as if no one had been there at all. I stumbled to my feet, feeling a sickening sense of disorientation. The memories of the past few days were blurry, fading quickly. I tried to hold on to them, but the details slipped through my mind like sand through fingers. When I checked my bank account later, I found a new deposit, a substantial one, more than I'd ever made in any case. It was as if they were trying to erase my involvement with a payoff, like none of it had ever happened. In the following days, I noticed subtle changes around me. People I'd known for years seemed distant, their eyes glazed when they talked to me, as if they barely recognized me. My phone contacts began disappearing, and even old friends started treating me like a stranger. I tried reaching out to Dr. Kane, but I was told she'd taken a leave of absence with no return date. A deep paranoia set in, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the unseen was still watching, waiting. I became a ghost, a shadow of who I was, terrified that one wrong move would make me disappear entirely, like Leon Finch. Months later, I heard a rumor about a man matching Leon's description seen living under a different name in a remote town, but I didn't follow up. The case was closed for me, forcibly. I knew now that curiosity could be fatal, that there were things hidden in this world better left unknown. And every so often, late at night, I feel it, that gaze, a pair of eyes watching from the shadows, waiting for me to make the wrong move.